I'm going live, and there are people here. Nice to see you guys. I see Rebecca. I see Matt. I see Chris. I see Highest of Seven. Nice to see you guys. If anybody wants to raise a hand and join, we can try to do that. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but we'll try it. In the meantime, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about what SIC Weekly looks like this week in the second iteration of its Wednesday edition. It's been interesting going through because I'm taking the time right now to edit and try to figure out what my categories are. Right, the new edition categories are like the current moment, futures, launches, platforms, artistics and stylistics, entertainments, media and marketings, food and drinks, and the natural world. And a few of the topics that have come up, right? The story in the New York Times this morning about how AI is hallucinating, as it does, the videos and imagery from the 1990s, and how this is creating nostalgia for young people too young to remember the 90s. I have to be honest, I cannot like watch or I can't see any of these stories without instantly going back to the line from LCD Sound Systems, "Losing My Edge," about kids, like recreating the unremembered 80s. It seems so interesting that we naturally gravitate towards providing these kind of hagiographic views of times that we didn't participate in. But it seems to be a natural fact. And it also it's intriguing because you see the similarities. I'm going to walk over, picked up a new issue of Thrasher yesterday, it's not the newest issue, it's the second newest issue of Thrasher, because there's a story about the museum show in Syracuse that I helped William Strobeck produce. And I'm going to flip through and show you an image that I saw in it that I thought was really cool, but also very much brought this story to mind. It's a picture of Nadas Copus and I think a guy named Mike Archimedes, although I could be wrong about that. But it's an ad for the Thrasher store, and it's a picture of them in a rubber raft. If you're watching this, you can see it on screen here. But it's a picture of them in a rubber raft. Nadas is probably 7 or 8 years older than me, so he's approaching 60 now. Mike Archimedes, I'd imagine, be about the same age. But that image, judging by the footwear in it, is probably from 1989, 1990. But I looked at it and was just like, wow, that kid looks just like Nadas. Meaning the kids today look identical to the kids in 1990 seen through a particular lens. And it's fascinating. Both because you sort of expect the kids to want to look a little different, but also because in 1990, I don't think anybody looked around at their peers in our age group and thought, yeah, that outfit is going to play when I'm 50 with my Vision Streetwear shoes and my Limpies pants. It's kind of remarkable. Anyway, one of the other things that we've been trying to do, or I've been trying to do with TikToks is this new a new table of contents, sorry, I misspoke. With SIC Weekly is to do a new table of contents and to get into launches, because I think there are so many interesting things coming to market at the moment that to not highlight the similarities and differences, dissonances between some of the new products coming to market would be a missed opportunity. That being said, I had a bunch of launches last week when I initiated the section. Duolingo launched chess, which is an intriguing idea, chess as a language, or learning chess as language instruction, which makes sense, right? There are patterns involved. There are vernaculars in terms of styles of gameplay. We've all seen whatever the Anya Taylor-Joy chess series on Netflix is, but also because it indicates how these instructional services can't be limited to just the how-tos around learning language, as deep and as rich as that territory is. It's like once you've picked up a proficiency in Spanish, if you don't want to then go learn Swahili or whatever, they have to offer you something that is actionable and immediately accessible. And SES as a language, I thought was a pretty cool idea. But the launch section this week is a little flat. And so if anybody listening has any interesting stuff launching, I'd be really keen to hear about it. In the meantime, some of the stuff is launching. Oh, Gordy Hull, our resident art director, sent me the Mischief Hot Wheels Skitbox um, car. Anybody familiar with this at all? The idea is basically that Mischief made a Matchbox car, so it's a small scale Matchbox car. I'll pull an image up for those watching, and they said basically if we were going to make a Matchbox car, we would want to make it a shitbox. Let me see if I can turn this around to do it. Thank you guys for bearing with me on my live journey here. All right, so there is the Matchbox car. There is the Mischief shitbox in package. Here is the explanation of how it's not a normal car. But then the idea is that it's literally a car as you would see abandoned on the side of the road. And in fact, I think there's an image here someplace. Yeah, this is actually in Williamsburg, not far from the Mischief headquarters near the BQE, where they seem to have, at the very least, generated a full scale version of this car, which looks like a classic sort of Nissan Sentra entry level American sedan, which somebody has done some ill advised customization on. It's interesting. So other than that, though, I'm struggling with launches a little bit, and it underscores the challenge that I have with this whole the week in week out of putting the newsletter together. Is that the news is it's lumpy. There a lot of things will happen in the zeitgeist one week, and then nothing particularly interesting will happen. A lot of stuff will happen with launches, and then nothing particularly would happen. The thing that always happens is art, and that's which is why art has been a historical anchor of SIC from the very beginning. I went to the Armory show this weekend, and as I was saying to some people at breakfast, I liked it a lot, and I thought that um, the occasion was really interesting. I went on Sunday after the rush of VIP buyers and after a lot of the sales had taken place, and was just there with sort of the people that are there to kind of gaze at the art. And the thing that struck me was how interesting and varied the community was, and how much energy there was this year relative to last year. When I went on Sunday last year too, the difference, though, was that the art this year didn't take me the same way as it did last year. Like last year, I discovered a couple of artists. One, the painter Alexandra Booth, whose work I ended up buying at some point later. Shout out to Mrs. Gallery in Maspeth, who sold me an Alex Booth painting, and who presented Alex in the Armory show last year. But I don't know. There was just something a little less salient this year, and I don't know exactly what it was. That, however, was made up by the fact that the crowd was kind of amazing, and that the energy level was good. It felt like the art world was vibrant and interesting. And one of our regular Breakfast Club guests this morning made the comment that he thought it felt like this year had seen a reset in terms of where the gravity of the art world was, that it was more attuned to young, developing, diverse, and international artists than it had been in the past, which I've found kind of fascinating, because you would think, given the broader cultural move towards populism, leaning right, traditional mores here in America, Western wear and Americana and all this kind of stuff, that you would sort of expect it to lead into those who have been part of the traditional cultural hegemony. Instead, either as a reaction or as a means of demonstrating uh, proverbially white space, you had this kind of proliferation of young artists, which is great. That's my sweet spot. I just didn't necessarily find the young artists that I thought were perfect. One thing I did find, though, I went to a show that former Sick Talks guest Aaron Stern curated in the East Village at a new gallery called Abri M or something to that effect. Let me find out exactly what the name of it is. But in any case, it's a photo show. It's really interesting, and in it was a photo by Jerry Sue, who is best known as a pro skater, and in fact the proprietor of Sci-Fi Fantasy, whose T-shirt I happen to be wearing today. I didn't intend that to be the case, but he Aaron organized this show, and and I've always admired Jerry's photos for a long time, and there was a Jerry photo in it that I um, had the opportunity to make an offer on, which Aaron accepted, which I'm pretty excited about. I'll show you a picture of the photo. This is here. It's just laid out on a thing. It's a telephone pole and a bunch of wires. So there's a lot of interesting lines and geometry to it. But there's, I think, a fire hydrant or potentially a fire hose kind of exploding in the background of it. So it creates this really surreal moment where it's a moment of action in front of this like very placid kind of blue sky in LA. And then the telephone pole is being immersed in steam and water, which obviously not the typical mode of telephone poles. Anyway, I really like that one, and I'm stoked to own something of Jerry's. Jerry, by happenstance, is on the cover of Thrasher, in which this story that I was telling you about um, also exists. This, by the way, for those who didn't grow up on skateboard magazines, the next time you go into a Barnes and Noble or a McNally Jackson, as I did yesterday, and you see an issue of Thrasher, pick it up and just flip through the ads. Like I had forgotten to some extent how distinct skateboard print ads are from everything else that you see in the space. But here's one, for instance, which I really liked a lot. It's an ASICS skateboarding ad. So ASICS, the Japanese shoe company known for its running shoes, makes a widely admired new range of skateboard shoes. And this is a picture of two guys playing ping pong, Victor Campillo and Jaakko Onanen, and they're playing ping pong. And the text says competitive skateboard advertising. Now, clearly, there's no skateboarding in it, but it reminds me a lot of the kind of World Industries ads of my youth where the joke was the point, not the trick, not necessarily even the personality, but just like the joke. And that joke was what then gave rise to Spike Jonze's music video career, commercial career, film career. It's what led into the Beastie Boys Grand Royal magazine, which then gave rise to things like the Girl Skateboards Art Dump, which produced artists like Kevin Lyons and Jeff McFetridge. Um, it, it, it was this wellspring of humor that and combined with design and art that created an aesthetic that has influenced the last 30 years of pop culture, visuals, marketing, etc. Um, and it is not out of the question to think like, okay, that ad is going to inspire some kid at some point to create a really funny, new, tongue-in-cheek way of representing fashion or brands or services that 30 years will be talking about on the solo pod on Substack Live. Ay, ay, ay. All right, guys, we're like 15 minutes in and I'm already feeling it. So if anybody's got any questions or wants to raise a hand or throw anything in to the chat, let me know. But the one great example of this kind of ridiculousness coming out of skateboarding and turning it into a kind of a broader cultural phenomenon is the Dime Glory Challenge. And there's a story in SIC that I just found this morning from Monster Children. It's called Dispatches from the Dime Glory Challenge, and you can see it here a little bit. Dime is a Montreal brand, started as a skate shop, started to make its own cut and sew stuff, and then because it's a key point of distribution for footwear, for hard goods, etc., they have partnered with a bunch of different brands to create co-branded stuff. The biggest of those is in partnership with Vans, and this year with Red Bull, where they create in an arena in Montreal the Dime Glory Challenge, and they put on a whole series of ridiculous challenges for skateboarders, as well as tons of parties, tons of just pure skateboarding, lots of very baggy shorts, as you can see here in these pictures. But the marquee event takes place in the former Olympic Stadium at in Montreal on the expo grounds, and it includes these amazing drop-ins. It includes these guys dressed like minions who do all of the work around the course. But then let's see if we can scan through Monster Children's photos here to get to the major point. There's this giant pyramid that people launch over and we're going 25 feet in the air on. Anyway, now that I think about it, this is a very artistic lake. Okay, here you see not the painting. This is the volcano, and this got progressively taller throughout the contest. So much so, this is Pedro Barros. It looks like coming back in from having gone over the top of it while carrying a sword, which is very much in the spirit of the Dime Glory Challenge. So anyway, Monster Children was there and wrote about it. And as Wesley just said in the chat, he read that story this morning, and it is truly insane. So thank you for chiming in, Wesley. Let's go back to the TOC for SIC as I'm putting this together. One of the other things that has been hot in or hot topic in my house, and just generally speaking around my universe lately, has been around alternative medicines and homeopathy. And there are a couple of interesting stories around how the Trump administration is looking at drugs. The first one is a story from Military Times, which, to be very clear, I don't read or subscribe to, but which was referred to me in. This one I want to say was in Double Blind, which is a publication about hallucinogenic medical substances, medical practices, etc. But it's a link to the Military Times, and it talks about how the Department of Defense is going to drug test for psilocin, which is the active form of psilocybin, aka the active chemical in hallucinogenic mushrooms. And the story is really intriguing because, or Double Blind's vector on it is really intriguing because what the Military Times is saying basically is that in light of things like the airline pilot 2 years ago who tried to deliberately crash the plane he was flying because he was on a mushroom trip, apparently, because of safety risks that are associated with the drug, the DoD is, going to screen for it, and obviously, because it's a banned substance, will presumably penalize people who are found to have taken it. That is in stark contrast to the idea that those kinds of hallucinogens can be used as therapeutical tools for people with PTSD. And it dovetails with another story that is in Reason about how the FDA has moved the goalpost, according to MDMA advocates, on using MDMA, aka ecstasy, as a therapeutic tool for people with everything from PTSD to intimacy issues to dissociative ailments and that kind of stuff. I'm reminded of all of this because I heard a talk years ago at Vice by Ben Anderson, who's a journalist and a friend, and who spent many tours, I don't know how many exactly, 7, 8, 9, something like that, as a reporter on the front lines in Afghanistan with British military with American military, and who himself, as a function of that, suffered from pretty wild PTSD. Ben was also he's an English guy, and he was, as did most of his generation in England. He had recreationally used MDMA at some point as ecstasy, as a club drug. And I asked him a question after he gave this talk about his MDMA therapy for PTSD, how different it was, and he kind of couldn't put into words the distinction, or the difference in terms of its effects in a therapeutic context, and how much of an accelerant it was on him getting through some of his PTSD issues, than it was as a club drug where it's just pure hedonism and kind of fun. The idea that the DoD is choking out a liability here makes a lot of sense. The idea that it is cutting off a path to recovery that could affect a much wider number of people, because let's be honest, most people on mushrooms are not trying to crash planes, um, is a sort of an interesting statement about the way I think this administration approaches most problems. It's like, let's correct for the edge case rather than for the widest applicability. Um, and it seems reactionary, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, given that also there's a story in, let me find this thing. I want to say it was the New York Times, but I'm not seeing it right this minute. But about some hikers in the Adirondacks who had to be rescued because they got too stoned. They got debilitatingly stoned. Yeah, this is going to turn us around. Sorry, I don't mean to. I'm laughing with you guys, not laughing at you, I promise. But the idea that these hikers on psychedelic mushrooms had to be rescued from the Catskills because they were debilitatingly high, and that this was the second such episode in recent months, is it does give one pause to think maybe there's a certain amount of education, or at the very least procedure, that needs to be put in place on these things. Ay, ay, ay. By the way, just a quick aside to those who are listening to this after the fact. God, I can't imagine many of you are, but anyway, there are now 15 people in the live stream, including a bunch of friends, um, like Leanne Abad, who is a stalwart of Breakfast Club, and Yolanda, excuse me, Carvalho, who's one of my very favorite sources, as well as the crew from the Rosie Lee group in London. And so, if any of you familiar faces or unfamiliar faces want to throw out, my new buddy Chris, who guested on the Hip Replacement podcast, is here too. Anybody got anything for me in the chat? Please throw it in. You're listening to Sick Talks Live. This is episode number 102. It is a solo pod, and one that is, I don't know. Hopefully it's going okay. All right. Switching gears for a second. One question that people ask me a lot is how I get through all of the stuff that I get through in the Sick weekly newsletter. And I'll just walk you through my process a little bit in case it's interesting. Every morning I get up, I make myself a cup of coffee, I feed the dogs, and then I sit down at the computer for round about 2 hours, and I read all of the stuff in my inbox. And that is a wide variety of newsletters that come in from all over the world. Many of them are, individual personality Substacks. Many of them are publications from the New York Times and the FT, and and others. And some of them are digests in themselves, like Tyler Cowen's Marginal Revolution. And I scan through and I just look for headlines that grab me as being pertinent to one of my many interests, right? So art, music, culture, fashion, entertainment, marketing, media, to a lesser degree, food. I think food is a subject that people pay a lot of attention to. I don't really care that much about food, but I like food trends as an indicator around IRL experience. And I bookmark or I'll open a tab, I'll scan through the story. Where it grabs me, I'll read more deeply. And then if I feel like it's pertinent and it hasn't been either covered to death already, or alternately that it sits outside of like the purview that I expected it to, I'll copy paste the link into a notes doc and and just sort of aggregate those notes docs. Um, what I then do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday, I take the first 20 during the week or 30 on Sunday links that I found, and I put those into the paid digest for SIC subscribers. The idea being those folks who are generous enough to help support do this at a paid level are getting the first crack at the information. Wednesdays is taking the wider list of links that I've accumulated after those first 20 every morning and putting them into categories. And then now, as of volume 8, limiting them to 50 links that I feel like are most indicative, are the highest quality, hopefully have the fewest number of paywalls. Although things like the New York Times, I know it's a paywall, but sorry, guys, like there's too much information that comes out of that one that I can't not include it. But I'll put those in to 50, and that's what is going to inform SIC Weekly going forward. The categories, again, allow me to break up the flow of information. SIC began as a kind of an exquisite corpse of stories that was sort of like, oh, and then this thing happened in skateboarding, and then speaking of wheels, this thing happened in buses, and then speaking of mass transit, this thing happened in airplanes, and then speaking of getting high, this thing happened in drugs, and then speaking of mushrooms, this thing happened in food. That was the sort of the mental chain. But what I discovered was that it was too hard to replicate that flow easily every week. Sometimes it comes really naturally, and other times it doesn't. So I sort of employ that in the daily paid versions of SIC Day, but in the weekly I organize by category, and it's by my interest. From there, I then take the slices of the artwork that Gordon Hull very generously provides every week. I segment the newsletter. I typically am like an hour before my self-imposed deadline at that point, and try to compose some cogent thoughts about where my head's at, or things that I want to do, or where people can meet me this week, or whatever the case is. And at 2:59 and 40 seconds, I'm scrambling to hit publish for a 3 p.m. go live with on Substack. It's not a perfect system, but then again, the reason I do this is to create a means of pattern recognition, and to engage with the world actively. So I guess I empathize a little bit with that uh, Wimbledon social media manager who we cited last week, who says published is better than perfect. The fact that I can go back and adjust things and edit and make corrections later is a crutch that I lean on maybe more than I should. So anyway, that's how we make SIC, and it's good fun. And I think I would feel very unresolved if I didn't do it every week. By the same token, I spend more time on it than I probably should, and so I'm always thinking of ways or I'm always trying to find ways to economize and to become more efficient with my time. One of those is, moving the live podcast, or the podcast, to Substack Live, because it forces me to be a little bit more direct and present with the recording and the scheduling, and to get out in front of it. So to that end, next week I'm going to be joined by Reggie James, who does has a fantastic Substack himself, is a sort of a young tech entrepreneur, and recently sold a company. So he's sort of a little bit of a gentleman of leisure at the moment, as I understand it. And that's in the best possible way, to be clear. The week after that, the guest is being confirmed, but TBD or TBC is one of my most significant sources of subscribers over the last few months. So hopefully that will work out, and I'll get to talk to a new friend. The week after that will be Francis Zierer from the Creator Spotlight, who is also relatively new, a relatively new friend, but who invited me on to the Creator Spotlight last week with his co-host Daisy Alioto, alum of SIC Talks, and we had a great chat, uh, which was labeled generational luxury, and it was I don't know that it was necessarily about generational luxury, to be honest, but we did touch on that a little bit. I admire very much the ecosystem that Francis has built with the Creator Spotlight, which, as you'd imagine, is focused around creator business and the creator economy. But it's unlike outlets, and I don't want to pick on them, but like the published press, which feel a little bit more rah rah, and B, a little bit more sort of didactic. In other words, to succeed, here's what you do. Um, Francis, I think, approaches those conversations with the spirit of real curiosity and um, not knowing what he doesn't know, and so the conversations are illuminatory, obviously for him, and you can hear him learning as you go. But also, they're much more useful for the listener, I think, and they also. Then he translates them in the newsletter in a way where he takes lessons and sort of, draws conclusions that I think are very instructive. So anyway, Francis, I'm a fan. Looking forward to talking in a couple of weeks. Beyond that, I've also got Jenny Nicholson on the docket. Jenny is a AI innovator who I met at the Brand AI conference last year, and is doing some kind of amazing projects with AI that throwing back to or calling back to the sort of weird skateboard ad stuff from earlier, is really intended to use the medium for purposes of experimentation and fun first, and then to ascertain sort of business cases and business uses after that. I really admire that way of doing things, and I regret that I haven't spent more time messing around with AI to learn some of that. Part of the move from SIC from Thursdays to Wednesdays was to clear up space Wednesday afternoons, and uh, on Thursdays and Fridays, to be able to experiment more and to clean it up. What I found was I was spending too much time finalizing the newsletter on Thursdays in particular, and it would sort of gunk up the works otherwise. So that's why I moved it. So yeah. All right. Well, we are now 35 minutes into this solo pod. My buddy Alyssa Vingen, who I ran into last night at a live taping of Lauren Sherman's Fashion People, the podcast that she does for Puck, and it's the one thing that you can get without being part of the Puck subscriber base, because you can listen to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I ran into Alyssa last night, and this thing that I'm going through right now reminds me a little bit of something Alyssa said when she did a solo pod, which is, how difficult it is. I wouldn't describe this as difficult per se. I can talk forever, but in it, you definitely are thinking like, does anybody care? Is anybody listening to this at all? Does this matter? I hope it does. But anyway, I'm going through it. We'll see. We'll look at the metrics after the fact and see whether the 17 people currently listening reacted to it in any kind of meaningful way. If you are, feel free again to raise a hand, put something in the comments, say hello, etc. All right, back to the list. We have, speaking of pods, and also launches. The one thing that I have in the launch section this week is Smartless, the Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, Sean, whatever Sean's last name is, podcast of of $100 million deal fame with Odyssey, maybe, and whichever platform is they're going to do a live pod at the Hollywood Bowl, which is the first time that the Hollywood Bowl has hosted a live podcast recording. This, I think, is pretty interesting as an indication of both where the live economy is headed, where the podcast economy is headed, and then in conjunction with that, the ways in which IRL experience is hungered for by people, but not necessarily the same IRL experiences that we've had in the past, right? You can sell tickets to a podcast recording, and we've seen this with All In. We are seeing this with Smartless at vast scale, and treat them like a concert, um, despite not changing necessarily the level of intimacy or the programming of the item very much, right? Like when um, Oasis plays a stadium, they play in front of an LED that is 50 yards wide. When Sean, Will, and Jason get on stage and sit in chairs, maybe you'll get a giant screen. What's more likely is that you'll get um, uh, an audience that is actively listening and where the visuals are less important. And yet they'll get the same entertainment value out of that as they would to going to see the Gallagher brothers. Um, I think that's really inspiring because it says that we can hold two values in our hand or in our hands at once, right? On the one hand, there is the learning and matriculation part of that of that discussion, right? The takeaways and the insights, and on the other hand, there is um, the pure entertainment value of just listening to people talk and communing with opinions, the human voice, conversational exchange. Uh, Things don't have to be flashy and explosive to be engaging, um, and so I think we're just gonna we are going to see a lot more of that stuff, particularly as these individual creators, in the way that Emily Sundberg does, in the way that Barry Weiss has, in the way that the Smartless guys do, or even uh, somebody like a Tyler Cowen who has been out publishing Marginal Revolution for years, does on its own, building footprints and frameworks that are super viable from a capitalist perspective, but also are really interesting and instructive, which is important because the counterpoint to those inputs is the world of AI stuff for stuff's sake, slop for slop's sake, which potentially pervades our airways. That brings me to a story that I think was really kind of fascinating, and I can't think of where I found this specifically, but whoever cited it said, "Geez, the Hollywood Reporter really can rage bait." This is a story. It's called 5,000 podcasts, 3,000 episodes a week, $1 cost per episode behind an AI startup's plan. And so this is, and I'll turn the camera around here for those watching. This is in the Hollywood Reporter from yesterday, September 9th. And it's about how a new firm called Inception Point AI is going to flood the zone with audio content made up by AI generated podcast hosts named Claire Delish, who is a food person, Ollie Bennett, this gentleman here in the middle, ruggedly handsome, who is a sports host, and Nigel Thistledown. I mean, honestly, like, talk about a name from a skip, who is a nature expert. So we are going to go into Nigel's garden, and we will get to hear all about the Thistledown core across his podcast. But the story here really is that this company is taking the same approach as programmatic advertising. Basically, it's like, let's put as much stuff into the marketplace as possible with the hope that we gain some sort of marginal traction with each particular instance, and that marginal attraction adds up to an aggregated value that is significant. It doesn't really matter if anybody listens to this. It doesn't really matter if the subject is valid. It's just more like chill beats to study to, stuff that happens in the background and that creates inventory around it that can be sold and be monetized. Um, to say this is both kind of genius and deeply cynical, I think understates both of those thoughts. Um, but it is the sort of state of things that we're in, and it then emphasizes the fact that you have to have some sort of live experience as a part of any, let's call it, media brand creation, because if you don't, you run the risk of just becoming Nigel Thistledown in terms of how you're perceived by the audience, right? Whether or not I'm a real person and offering real opinions, or whether I am, an LLM with a skin suit on, um, is going to be determined, maybe not exclusively, but largely by whether or not people can actually reach out and find me in the real world at some point. Um, so yeah, on the one hand, like I appreciate the, can you believe we're getting away with this spirit of the initiative? On the other hand, I just think it's kind of just wasteful, really. And we're at a point where the world doesn't need any more waste. Um, so that's that. All right, let's go back to the newsletter. One of the things that's going to end up in the platform section is that Perfectly Imperfect celebrated 5 years yesterday. Perfectly Imperfect is a recommendation newsletter started in the pandemic by a couple of friends, Tyler and Alex. And the idea was essentially cool recommendations by cool people doing cool stuff, um, in the high pandemic when everybody was sort of stuck at home and needed recommendations for entertainment and community connection. What Tyler has since built is this, not only the recommendation engine through Perfectly Imperfect, which is distributed via an email newsletter, but also a social network, so to speak, called pi.fyi. That's Perfectly Imperfect pi.fyi, where essentially it harkens back to the early Facebook days, or even Napster, Friendster days, or excuse me, Friendster, MySpace days, where your status update was the coin of the realm, and where you're putting in the things that you think are interesting or that you can recommend to other people. They've grown to 150,000 users on the platform in these 5 years, and I know the plan is to scale from here. But I love the fact that PI is just about the subjective recommendations of individual people, as opposed to the algorithmically tuned, um, most likely next answer, or hyper targeted, behaviorally hyper targeted, um, you know, product on demand. Um, the guys from Eckhouse Lotta today recommended black beans, which is cool. I like black beans. I'm don't need a fashion designer to recommend black beans to me, but I love the fact that if a fashion designer loves black beans, they don't have to tell me about their favorite fashion. They can tell me about their favorite beans. This is increasingly, I think, what we want, right? It's the spirit of serendipity and discovery that comes from chance encounters or human foible. Um, the recommendations like that are kind of a proof of life that distinguishes them from, again, the algorithmically optimized slop. Um, but it also allows a space for play and for improvisation. I read something, and I'm not going to be able to cite the source right this minute, but it's essentially about how the human culture is built on riffing. The idea, instead of when we make small talk saying, how do you spend your weekend? Answer, how do you spend your weekend? It's more like, how do you spend your weekend? Answer, detail from that answer, informing another question, which is not a reflective one, but one that actually plays on the answer and asks uh, a, a directional question that leads the conversation someplace else. So, in other words, it becomes an actual conversation as opposed to just an exchange. Um, the great weakness of late capitalism in a lot of respects is that we are so focused on the exchange that we miss or maybe we're so focused on the transaction that we miss the value of the exchange. I think. Anyway, I can go on forever about that. All right, we are down to about 10 minutes of the promised hour that I said I was going to do the solo pod for. Hopefully, you found this interesting. Um, Please put, if you're listening to this, feel free to add a comment or a cat call um, into it. And those that are watching on Substack, we're holding firm at 17 concurrents, which I feel good about. So glad you guys are here. Um, the 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 last thing to talk about, maybe before we go further into this, is the story that I picked up from Casey Lewis's after school newsletter. It is a story from the New York Times, and it is about how girls are screaming, particularly a shriekathon in the John Proctor is a Villain stage show is the latest in a wave of young women letting their pipes loose and exhorting anyone to join in. Um, this reminds me a little bit of something of a workout class that my friend Karina, former guest on Sick Talks, told me about. I want to say it's maybe Tracy Anderson. Um, let's see. I'm going to Google Tracy Anderson scream. Yes, often part of the Tracy Anderson method, where people are essentially encouraged to scream while doing their workouts. But the idea of scream therapy, catharsis, um, is having a moment because of this stage show, and then also is being encouraged, like pop stars like my favorite Olivia Rodrigo, um, and it is a part of a long-standing association of young women or girlhood with frenzy, um, that, according to the Time story, is present in everything from sort of like group sleepovers and fangirls to horror victims, to witches, right? To coven of witches. Um, and is the weak signals in the culture are taking this John Proctor's The Villain show, the new Florence and the Machine record, which is called Everybody Scream, and is talking about the ways in which or young women are inverting bravado into a scream of feminine fury and frustration, to quote our girl Florence. I think this is pretty cool, and it reminds me a lot of growing up skateboarding, where if you didn't make a trick for whatever reason, but usually because you couldn't wrap your own head around it, you would let yourself down mentally, you would chicken out. Um, People would scream, and the wildest and most pyrotechnic of those screaming fits have been captured in skateboard videos since the very beginning. People, breaking their skateboards, smashing their skateboards on the ground, screaming, you know, huge long strings of profanity. Um, but it's always been a very male expression, and a very, like, subcultural and let's call it impolite. It's not the word I'm searching for, but let's say it was not, chaste and tasteful by any stretch of the imagination. So to see young women reclaiming this, or to claiming it and turning it into a movement, I think is pretty exciting. Um, Especially, like, as my hearing goes away and I need people around me to scream. Sorry, had to get that dad joke in there at the end. Uh, so yeah, well, I have to say this has been fun in a weird way. I don't, I for years of my life, sort of, I joked, got paid to entertain. I would get up in front of audiences and present, and I would typically have a slideshow, or I would have, a topic to riff on or whatever. Um, this recording, having been unplanned, had none of that, but maybe it was interesting. I don't know. Hopefully, got in my head a little bit and understand my process. Uh, and you can then please respond very candidly about whether it's any good. um, but I appreciate everybody tuning in and listening after the fact, and I hope that we will get to do this again at some point in the future with feedback, so that I can shape it and make it a little bit more I don't know what, linear, or more meandering, if that's what you like. Happy to just associate. It's kind of how my brain works anyway. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. This has been Sick Talks number 102, recorded live on Substack on Wednesday, September 10th, 2025. Big shout out to all of the friends and regular listeners who are here. And if you are listening to this on an audio platform or watching it on YouTube, um, do me a favor and send me some thoughts in the comments, or send a like or subscribe, or all that stuff. You know how that works. It helps with the algo, and then beyond that, it's just a nice little data point for me to do more, do better, or do less, depending on what you want. All right, y'all. Bye.